Welcome to Junkyard Theory. This is episode number 20, and today's guest is somebody who is an animation director. He is also a storyboard and a comic book artist, and he's worked with studios like DreamWorks, Marvel, DC, and he has. There we go. And he's currently working with Netflix. And if unless you've been living under a rock, you've obviously heard of the uh, animation series called Invincible, which was released on Amazon Prime recently, and he is the storyboard artist behind that amazing series, which I binge watched in 2 days. Micah Gunnell, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So tell me, you we went through Invincible's origin story. Tell me yours.
Mine. Okay.
Yeah.
So where do we start? I've been drawing since I was a little kid. I think my mom still has like my first ever drawing from when I was like 2 years old. It's like a couple of circles next to each other, and it's supposed to be a caterpillar. But yeah, like skipping ahead from there, I guess I discovered. I never really knew exactly what I wanted to do in art. I always knew I wanted to be an artist, but it was always like, the exposure to art that I had was like fine artists. My parents would go to like a museum. We lived near Washington D.C., so we would go to a lot of the big art museums there, and I would hear stories about, oh, this guy, he didn't become famous until 30 years after his death, and he died in poverty. Or he went insane, and it's like, that doesn't sound like a great career path. So it was always in my head. I was always like, well, I'm going to be an artist because I am an artist. I looked at it as something where you either are or you aren't, and it has nothing to do with whether you make money doing it. So I always sort of thought in my head, well, I want to be an artist and a lawyer, or I want to be an artist and an Air Force pilot, fighter pilot. So it was basically like whatever, like the cool new movie that was out that had some kind of like Tom Cruise is, in Top Gun, like, oh, that looks cool. I'll do that and I'll be an artist or whatever, So that was sort of my thought process early on. And I never really thought that art was something that I could do and make a living at until actually the first thing that sort of changed my perspective on that was when the old X-Men, the 90s era X-Men cartoon came out.
Yeah.
And they had, I was probably about 14, I think. So it was sort of like I was in the upper end of like almost being too old to watch Saturday morning cartoons, but that was sort of like one of the last ones that I really watched a lot of. And I remember at the end of one of the episodes, they had like a little infomercial thing saying, oh, you can continue the adventures of the X-Men reading this comic book. And like, for whatever reason, I never read comic books before that. And I hadn't really even considered it. But I was really into the show. So I went, and I think I went to like a local bookstore or something, and I found two X-Men comics, picked those up, and I think I saw the name of the person that drew it, and I was like, oh, there's a person that draws this, and I would assume they get paid money to do that. And I loved the art style, and so at that point I was like, how do I do this? How do I find out more about this? How much money these people make, and is it something I could do? And so I guess from about 14, 14 or 15, I was like, this is what I want to do. I know this is what I want to do. And I really worked hard at it for a long time. And back then it was pretty hard to find out information about how to become a comic book artist, and like, how much you make as a comic book artist.
Yeah.
And all that kind of stuff. Now it's really easy with the internet. But back then that was, I guess, 94 maybe. So it was kind of like the internet was, I don't know. I don't remember exactly when the internet came about, but I don't remember being able to look up information on it very easily.
It came at different times for different people, I guess.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so yeah, like I just, you know, I started going to comic book shops, and I remember there was a guy there who was teaching like a comic book art class, so I like signed up for that, and I was like trying to ask him questions about it, and it was just a, you know, process of trying to figure out how to actually do this thing that I had in my mind. And then I kept, you know, I kept trying, and I was working on portfolios and things. And I remember Joe Madureira. I don't know if you know who Joe Madureira is, from Battle Chasers and, you know, all that. I remember reading a story in like Wizard magazine, where they said that he got into comics professionally when he was like 16. So that was like my first goal when I was like around that age. I was like, oh, I don't know, I don't think I can do this at 16. And then it was like, okay, well, maybe I can do it by the time I'm 18. And then that didn't happen. And then I was like, well, maybe I can do it by the time I'm 21. And then that didn't look like it was going to happen either. I was, you know, I had a portfolio review. I went to Marvel in New York City, and that was pretty encouraging. The guy, you know.
When was this again?
I had a lot of potential, but I was not ready. So
when was this again?
I must have been like 18. Me and a friend drove there, and I had this this meeting. I don't think they do that anymore, but at that time, like, I think I can't remember if I called them or something. I don't remember.
Okay.
But I set up this meeting with them, and the guy, they had like a submissions editor, and he looked at my work, and he was like, yeah, you've got a lot of potential, and this is really good. You know, you're not there yet, but, you know, keep working at it, blah, blah, blah. So a few more years went by, and I think I was still sort of trying to get in, but I didn't really see a definitive way of doing so. So I ended up going to a school called the Joe Kubert School of Cartoon and Graphic Art when I believe I was 21. I think I had just turned 21. And yeah, I went there. That was interesting. It was like a really small school. It was like 150 total students in 3 years. But it was a great experience. I met a lot of good friends there, and you know, honed my skills as an artist and learned more about, you know, the industry and all that. And then my dad paid for my first year, and then he said if I wanted to keep going, like, I would have to figure it out. I was like, all right. And in my head, I'm like, okay, now I know how much most comic book artists make, and it's not a lot. And do I really want to go into debts like for 2 more years at the school? And I sort of was talking to people there, and they were saying, oh, you're almost ready to be professional level. So I decided to not come back for the second year, and I was like, all right, I'm not going back to the school, so I'm gonna go back home to my parents, and not gonna work. I'm just gonna work on comic stuff and, like, you know, really hit portfolio stuff hard. And I did that, and there actually ended up being an online contest called Comic Book Idol. This is like way back by a website called comicbookresources.com. I think they're still around. So I participated in that. I got picked to participate in that, and it was like one of these things. It was like set up like American Idol, and you would have to do a different assignment every week, and everyone would like show their stuff online, and people would vote on it, and whoever got like the least number of votes, they were out, I guess. And I think I got through a couple of rounds of that, and then I got I think I lost. I got voted off or whatever. But during that time, Aspen Comics, I guess, was following this contest, and they saw my stuff, and they contacted me like while I was still doing the contest, and I was like, oh, this is like my big opportunity. And I was like, should I keep going with the contest, or should I like just quit and start talking to them, blah, blah, blah. but it worked out because I mean, maybe it had something to do with me being distracted and not really focusing on the contest, but I got voted off. And then I met up with them at San Diego Con that year, and they offered me a job. And then I moved out to California from Maryland, and yeah, that's what started my comic book career.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And transitioning from a comic book artist to story, to a storyboard artist, what was that process like?
It was not as easy as I thought it would be initially. So cut to 10 years, or no, 7 years later. Cut to 7 years later, after I'd been working in comics for 7 years. It was not looking super promising as far as like how much I was able to make. Not that I was like looking to get rich or anything, but it was a real struggle. And over those 7 years, the industry had kind of not gotten better, but gotten a little bit worse, I would say. So I was looking at the industry as a whole and just thinking like, man, I don't know if I can do this for the rest of my life, because I'd like to have like normal things in life. Like I mean, I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment with a friend of mine, and I didn't have a car. I was living pretty
frugally, I guess.
Yes, frugally. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
So I was sort of like I was looking for an opportunity to do something else, because I saw people doing, concept art and working in animation, working in games. And again, it was sort of one of these things where like, I see these people working in these industries, but I'm not really sure how to get into it. And I thought like, oh, you probably need to go to like a specialized school and go that route. I didn't really know. So I was actually living in Brazil at this time. My wife is Brazilian, and part of the reason why I was living there is because it made my money go further. So I was making dollars and living in Brazil and sort of trying to make things work that way. So a friend of mine who I had previously tried to sort of help get an opportunity to work in comics, he had now gotten a job in animation as a storyboard revisionist. And Justin Copeland, you might know him, actually. I don't know. He's on Instagram.
Heard the name.
Yeah. So yeah, his brother, Chris Copeland, got a job, I think it's Sony or something. And then he helped his brother get in. And then I made some post on in my journal back in the day on DeviantArt. I don't know if you remember DeviantArt.
Yeah. It's still around.
Before Instagram.
Yeah.
So I made some posts and I was like, I mentioned sort of offhandedly, like, I work in comics, so I'm broke. And it wasn't even like the point of like my journal or anything. I just sort of mentioned it as like a funny thing to say or whatever. And he commented on it. He was like, "Oh man, you should work in animation." Like that was his whole comment. And I was like, yeah, I should. That's a great idea. Why don't I do that? So it's kind of like, I had no idea of how that worked, or how I didn't even know he was working in animation when he made the comment. And I was like, yeah, like that would be cool, but I have no idea how to do that. And he was like, oh, well, I'll get back to you. And I was like, all right. And I kind of thought, like, I'd met Justin a few times at comic book conventions and stuff, and he was a nice guy and we got along, but we weren't like best friends or anything. So I was kind of like, he's probably not gonna forget that he even said that to me. But he got back to me like, I don't know, a week later or something, and he was like, hey, so are you interested in working in animation? And I was like, yeah, what's going on? And he said that he was getting promoted to be a storyboard artist and his position was going to become available. which the revisionist position is like the entry level position as a storyboard artist. So I was like, oh, that's cool. I was like, oh, can I work from Brazil? Because I'm living in Brazil now. And he was like, oh, never mind, because you got to live here. And I was like, wait. I was like, just out of curiosity, like, how much does a revisionist get paid?
Revisionist.
Yeah, and he told me, and the amount that he told me, it was like, I don't know, 4 times what I made in comics. So I was like, I'm flying to California on the next flight. So I interviewed for the position and ended up getting it. And through a lot of suffering and hard work and many unpaid overtime hours, I hung on to animation by my fingernails, and that's sort of how I got in.
And what does a revisionist do? What exactly, like, how is it different from a storyboard artist?
Yeah. So basically the way it works is, you have a script, and then the script gets handed off to the storyboard artists. It gets split into different sections. Each board artist has a different section. They do all the storyboards for that section, and then the director will say, oh, this part needs to be changed, blah, blah, blah. That part needs to be changed. Then the storyboarders will make some revisions themselves, and then their deadline happens, and then there's still usually more changes that need to be happening after that. And the revisionists are the ones who are responsible for making those changes. So there's notes that come down from executives and from supervising directors, and then all those notes get sort of compiled, and the director goes over those notes with the revisionist and tells them what to do, and then the revisionist goes in and makes the changes that need to be made.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And like, so moving on from a revisionist to a storyboard artist, like how much has the art of creating comic books helped you out in that sense?
Yeah, it helped a lot, I think. Number one, in comics, there's a lot more focus on I don't want to say on drawing. There's a lot of focus on draftsmanship in comics, and you have to be very, very clear in your drawings. So that, because the old way of doing it in comics, not so much now. A lot of it now is like one artist does, pencils and inks, or maybe even pencils, inks, and colors. But back when I was trying to get in, it was very much like there's a penciler, there's an inker, and there's a colorist. So as a penciler, you would want to be as clear as possible in your drawings, so that when you gave it to the inker, like, they didn't screw it up, or they didn't do something that you hadn't envisioned. So it really forces you to focus exactly on how you want things to look, to a degree that I would say is not as common in animation. A lot of people that sort of go go just into animation and to storyboarding, they keep their storyboards a little bit more rough, I would say. And yeah, I was pretty well versed in like anatomy, and also as far as storytelling goes, I did learn. I think I learned some animation storytelling techniques when I was working in animation, and prior to that. So I already sort of had some knowledge of, things like keeping characters on the same sides of the screen, or in the same sides of a panel. You don't want to like flip them around, things like that. That's called the 180 rule.
180 rule, yeah.
Yeah. So like, I didn't come from a film background, so a lot of those things, you were, I'm sure, pretty knowledgeable of all those things, but like a lot of comic guys are not. So there was some level of knowledge on my part going into animation about those film rules, but not to the degree of somebody who had actually gone to school for film or animation. So it was kind of like a mixed bag. Like, I think my director saw a lot of potential in me because he was like, oh wow, this guy can draw really well. But I think he also saw that I was pretty rough around the edges in other regards. So it was a learning experience for sure. But
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to storyboarding for film, something that we go about saying is like, all right, even stick figures are fine because as long as you get the idea across, it should be enough. But when it comes to dealing with animation, I guess like the distance between what you draw as a storyboard artist versus what comes out on screen, like that gap is like so little, and you need to like your storyboards have to influence they literally influence the animation quite a lot. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, when I came across your animatics for Invincible, it was pretty much like like a little rougher version of what I actually ended up seeing on screen. So I guess accuracy really comes into play as well.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. Like, there's also a difference between, say, like 2D animation and 3D animation. Like, you're, as a board artist, you have to be a lot closer to being on model and having clean drawings when you're dealing with 2D animation.
And you're working on 3D with Fast and Furious Spy Racers, right? That's what you're working on right now? Yeah.
I've worked on a few 3D projects. I worked on Ninja Turtles back in the day that was like the second thing that I did for Nickelodeon. And that was 3D. And then I worked on Fast and Furious Spy Racers for DreamWorks, and that was 3D. So yeah, it's like, but the thing is most of the people that work in 3D have also worked in 2D. So you kind of end up in this situation where it's like you have to develop like a quick way of drawing, and it doesn't end up changing too much. Like if you're on a 2D project and then you go to a 3D project, most people don't change the way they draw that much because it's hard to do. So I think, like what you said, in film, I've never done storyboards for film, but from what I understand, it's a lot more. It's a lot more just about like getting the rough idea across, and the actual drawings are not so important. But there's I don't know. There's some strange things with all these jobs, in my opinion, because even though some things might not be necessary for you to see in the storyboards, a lot of times directors want to see those things. Just in animation, I think to get that for them to envision what it's actually going to look like, they want to see it look prettier than it actually needs to be, if that makes sense. So even with film, like the project I'm working on now for Netflix, it has a lot of people from live action that are involved in it, and I think, from what I am gathering with this experience, a lot of what is valued in live action storyboards is sort of like getting a feeling across, getting like an atmosphere. So like the live action boards seem to have a lot more like shadows and like, oh, look at this cool Photoshop gradient that I put over, whereas like with animation, it's more structural. It's more about like, well, you don't really necessarily have time to put in tones or shadows. Like, we just want to get like the structure of this character accurate, so that compositionally we know that it's going to fit within the frame the way that you've planned it out to be. And in live action, it seems like they want something that sort of gives the feeling of the scene, gives like the overall feeling of the scene.
I mean, I think it's a little bit job dependent at the same time, because we had William Simpson, who did the storyboards for Game of Thrones on the show
Uh-huh.
previously, and what he was telling me was like, it depends, it depends on what the director actually wants, and it kind of varies from project to project. So doing a massive
Yes.
series like Game of Thrones, you have like a different set of requirements versus like a feature film. So
Yeah.
I'm guessing like even with animation, like with each and every project, like Invincible is of course going to be way different from Ninja Turtles and Spyro. Is like
Yep.
you have different what do you call demands that come with every single project. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's challenging too because like you said, it varies from director to director too. So the project that I'm working on now, um, well, I guess most of the time when you're working on something, at least in animation, you have teams. You have teams that
Hmm.
stick together. Not always, but so usually it's like two or three different directors, different episodic directors, and then on each of those, under each of those episodic directors, you have usually like a team of two or three storyboard artists, and then under those you have a couple of revisionists. Sometimes you have revisionists that sort of work on all the team's
Hmm.
stuff. But yeah, so on the project I'm working on now, and then also the previous project I worked on, uh, the storyboard artists sort of get shared between the directors. So they'll be with one director for a few months, and then they'll move to another director, and then they'll move to another director. And that's a challenge too, because you have to first get used to the style of the show and what
Yeah.
the overall direction of the show is, and then you get used to one director, what they want and how they do things, and um, how they like to how they like things to be done. And then as soon as you get comfortable with that, oh, now you go to somebody else, and it's like a totally different thing. So it's challenging. It's challenging to do that because as a storyboard artist, that's pretty much your primary function, is to make your director happy. And if you do that, then you're good. And if you don't, then you're no good. So yeah.
True. Talk to me a little bit about Invincible. Now, this it comes from a comic book series. So did Ninja
Mm,
Turtles, but I guess like the aesthetic kind of changes. But when it comes to
yeah.
Invincible, like you have the comic book, and then you have the animation series which you worked on. And
Mm,
I think this was done by Robert Kirkman from The
yeah.
Walking Dead. Yeah,
Yeah.
and there was
Cory
this
Walker.
style that I guess the fans were kind of used to. How much of that did you like incorporate when it came to Invincible?
Yeah. Well, the designs for the animation were done by Cory Walker, who is the original artist of the comic book series. So I mean, it was. I mean, you look at his designs; they look pretty similar to what was in the original comic.
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, and I read the original comic back when it first started coming out, and was a fan of it. So I definitely like tried to stick as close to Corey's style, and just sort of go off of that as much as possible. And I think that's what they wanted. That's what the whole show wanted. They wanted it to look like the original comic.
gotcha. Yeah, like I mean, it was really enjoyable. Like what I was telling you was, I binged the entire thing within 2 days because it was like
Yeah.
so bloody amazing. And you work your way up from storyboard artist to animation director as well. So what responsibilities
Yeah.
do you undertake, and how much say do you have in the creative process?
Mm. Yeah. Well, like you said, it varies from production to production. Usually, how much say you have, it kind of depends on uh, how like the larger the budget, the less say that you have. I would say. So usually, like it's sort of a gift and a curse, because
Hmm.
it's like, oh, you can have a lot of influence, but really what that means is like, hey, we don't have money to pay somebody else to do all these other things that we want you to do. Can you do those? So which it's cool, and I've been in those situations. It's nice to have more influence over the overall
Hmm.
product, and uh, it's inspiring. but at the same time, it's like, oh man, I'm doing like 10, 12-hour days, and
It's a lot of responsibility.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, the way that kind of happened. Did you say how did I work my way up to doing that? Is that what you asked?
No, when you did become an animation director, like what responsibilities do you oversee and you
Yeah.
know?
So, so my first directing job was I I was working as a board artist on Guardians of the Galaxy for Marvel, like the animation, and and then my first director, the first director who hired me, um, he was the supervising director on Avengers Assemble, Jeff Allen, and actually
Mhm.
he is also the supervising director on Invincible. So there you go. This shows you
Yeah.
like make a good impression on people. Make sure that you you work
Connections,
hard and
connections. Yeah.
exactly, yeah, and don't burn any bridges. Like
Mm.
a lot of people think there's going to be unlimited number of bridges, but there really aren't. I've worked with a lot of the same people, multiple times throughout my career, and it's because you demonstrate to them that you are a valuable member of the team. So yeah, that aside. Anyway, so he was a supervising director on Avengers Assemble. I was rolling off of Guardians of the Galaxy, and he said, "Hey, you want to be a director?" I was like, "Really? Okay, sure." um, and yeah, that was pretty. That was an exciting time. That was a show. Avengers Assemble was one that did not have a huge budget, so it was one of the ones where I was doing a lot. I was taking on a lot of different responsibilities, which I'm glad that it happened when it did because I was very excited to be a first time director and
Hmm.
motivated. And yeah, I did a lot of design work. I you know both background design and character design and all that, and I would storyboard some stuff on the show as well. Um, but yeah, so normally like what you do is it's your responsibility to go through the script and make notes of things that could be problematic, things that are not going to work visually or are you know stretching people's ability to believe in whatever is supposed to happen, and addressing those with creative solutions. So we would do that. Me and my boss Jeff, he would go through it as well, and we just come up with a bunch of ideas and sort of implement those into the script. Then we would have a handout, to the board artists. So that's where hey, here's the script, read it, and then we'll go through like all the different notes and what needs to change and blah 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 blah. So we do that, and then they take the script, they rough out their sections, and they show you their roughs, and you go through the roughs and you say, oh, this needs to change, that needs to change, and maybe you'll go through and draw over their boards and say like, oh, do something like this, and then they go back and they have another whatever 3 weeks to clean up that stuff and implement the changes that you came up with, and then you get the clean boards back, and then you start the process of the revision step. So then you go through everything else that needs to change after the cleans come in, and you hand that off to the revisionists. So I mean, I would imagine it's pretty different from being like a film director. Like you don't get to change the script too much usually. Usually, like if you want to change something that's significant, you usually have to sort of talk to the writers about it first. So
Yeah.
the writers, I think the writers have more power in animation than in live action, I would say, based on what I
Pretty much.
understand.
Yeah.
So like you try to stick as close to the script as possible, and you usually try to only change what really feels necessary to change, and then yeah, hopefully the writers are cool with it, and if they are, then you go with that. But if not, you say like, oh, sorry, I won't change it. So, and that really kind of depends, on the show as well, because some shows are more they're more equal, and other shows are more dominated by either the writers or the story people.
Yeah.
And when I say story people, I mean people with a storyboarding background.
Gotcha. I've always wondered, when the artists or the performers, they come in for voice acting, how does that, like, is it a collaborative process between the animation department and them, or like do you have voices recorded beforehand and then you animate? Like, how does that work? It's always like baffled me.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I have never sat in on a voice recording before. Usually it's the supervising directors that do that. So they'll sit in on a voice record with an actor, but it's not even them. There's like a I forget the position, but there's another person whose responsibility it is that they really work with the actors more, and they say, oh, let's get it a little bit more like this or whatever. Let's record it this way. So that is, in a perfect world, supposed to happen before the storyboard artists get the script handout. So
Okay.
they should get like a track of dialogue recorded before they start storyboarding. That way they can really customize their on-screen acting and however they do it based off of the actual actor's performance, right? That doesn't always happen. So sometimes you don't get a recording of the actors until pretty far into the storyboarding process. As long as it gets done before the cleanup stage, it's usually okay. Obviously it's preferred that you have it beforehand, but because sometimes you'll think like, oh, I'm reading this dialogue in the script, I have an idea of what that'll sound like, and then you get the recording and you're like, that's totally different than what I imagined. So yeah, usually you should get the recorded dialogue sometime during the storyboarding process.
Gotcha. And working on something like Invincible, like, I mean, it's not necessarily aimed at kids. So I think you have, I don't know, maybe more freedom when it comes to animation. Like, how does that play out? I don't know. I don't necessarily know if I'm asking the right question.
Yeah. No, I
think you get it. Yeah.
There's some funny rules in animation. Like one of the famous ones, like as far as like kids animation, you are not supposed to show glass breaking in kids animation. Yeah. So
really,
so sometimes like a lot of the shows that I've worked on, they're action shows. So even though they're kids shows, they're like superheroes doing superhero stuff, right? So
how do you not show glass breaking?
No. Yeah. So I mean, that may not be quite accurate, but for example, I've read multiple scripts where it says, oh, character A jumps through this window and crashes through and then surprises the bad guy or whatever. And you have to note that and be like, we can't do that. We're not allowed to have characters jump through a glass window, because that might result in some kids jumping through a glass window because they saw it in a cartoon. And some of these rules are pretty silly in my opinion, but a lot of them sort of come out of the studios not wanting to get sued by parents saying, my kid jumped through a glass window because you showed it on your show. Pretty silly. But yeah, there's a lot of those kind of rules in kids animation. And obviously that's not a rule that we have in Invincible, because there's extreme graphic violence.
Hell yeah.
It was a
Hell
weird
yeah.
thing for me working on Invincible because, you know, I had worked at this point probably like 7 years doing kids shows.
Hmm.
So you sort of adapt to the rules that you're used to having, and Invincible pretty much threw out all those rules, and they wanted the opposite. So it was like, no, it's not violent enough. We want more brains splattering. We want to see his eyeball actually shoot out of his head. So it was interesting. It was like, oh, okay, I got it. Like, I think I got it. But yeah, so it went the opposite direction for sure. And
Do you think you
fun.
could
It was fun
actually go back to kids animation like after having worked on something like this? Because going back
Probably.
into that pen
I
with all
probably
the
will.
restrictions back, you know?
I mean, I don't like those restrictions. Like I like sort of a happy medium. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, I come from the school of thought that sometimes things can be more effective if you show less, you know? So not that I think you should shy away from violence if it's called for in the story, but sometimes if you show too much violence, it has the opposite effect. So it almost desensitizes you to the violence because it's always there.
It's kind of
So
like showing the demon in like a horror movie. So the
exactly.
more you kind of like
Yeah.
pull that
The
back
less
and
you
then
show, the
reveal it.
scarier
Exactly.
it
Exactly.
will be, yeah. So like I know in the first episode of Invincible, there wasn't really any violence until the very end, and then it was like extreme, you know, with the final or the fight between Omni-Man and the Guardians. Like that was, and I worked on that scene actually. That was I think that was the first scene that I did. So I didn't do the whole thing, but it was actually at that point, yeah. So I sort of worked on I was revising scenes that were already there when I first started, and yeah, it was like crazy violence. But that was kind of a little microcosm of that idea where it's like, okay, you don't show really any violence for a while, and then it's just like, whoa, and it just like shocks people, which I think is effective as well. But yeah, like I would still work in kids animation. You know, there's so much of it. Like we're still sort of in the we're still sort of functioning under the idea that animation is for kids for the most part. Like people still sort of perceive animation to be for younger audiences. That's changing a little bit, I think, but it's in the early stages of changing, I think. So for me to say, oh, I don't want to work in kids animation, that's really going to limit my ability to work in the industry, I think.
True. Because in recent times, like even I've come across stuff like Castlevania, which was on Netflix. Like it's leaning more towards the adult side, and there's so many interesting topics that they address, even from like the thematic material to pretty much the animation, everything. It kind of feels a little bit more grounded, and like it just doesn't feel like kid friendly either. Like
no.
but
it's
it works. It's very dark. It's very dark, but it works.
I think I don't know. I'm excited about the diversification of animation in that sense, because it doesn't make any sense why it should be only for kids. There's no real reason why. Like people like artwork, and that's essentially what animation is. It's moving art, right?
True.
So why not? I mean, people have been watching anime for years. Some of my favorite anime are like Ninja Scroll is one of my favorites from back in the day, and that had like crazy amounts of violence. But I remember when I first saw that, I was like, wow, this is amazing. It's super cool. It's not like cartoon mice and whatever. So like I that's another thing I guess I should say is I never thought I would work in animation. Like I was never interested in animation growing up until I discovered anime, actually. So like late 90s, I suppose, was when I first started watching anime, and I thought it was really cool, but at the same time there weren't any American studios really doing anything like that. So I didn't really have a whole lot of interest in it. And now you sort of see the repercussions of like people being exposed to like mature animation from Japan and also from Europe as well. I think people here are finally sort of starting to, or the people that were exposed to it when they were young, they're now older and they're like, oh yeah, like I would watch a show that's like for older people that's animated. Why not? Like I don't think that's weird. Whereas like if you look at like people that are sort of from the previous generation, I think they're the ones that sort of look at animation as like, oh, that's kid stuff. Like, nah, not necessarily.
True. And like anime has a massive influence even on like filmmakers, because if you take like movies like The Matrix, for instance, you can like definitely see the influence like playing off on screen. And with all the action lines and stuff like that, it kind of exaggerates action sequences pretty much like a lot.
Yeah.
And even in my own personal work, like I've tried to replicate that, and it's amazing. Like whenever there's like a fight scene, and it has some sort of anime influence, you can just definitely tell, all right, it's from there. It has that influence. It has its distinct style.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's always interesting to see like how I guess different media influence each other. Film influences animation, vice versa, comics. Like it's amazing.
It is, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And when it comes to, I guess, animation, like there's so much more that you can do as opposed to live action. So playing within that playground, I guess, what would you like to do next? Like what have you not done so far, which you crave to do like someday?
Yeah. I guess I would like to do my own project eventually. I don't feel like I'm anywhere close to being ready to pitch my project as an animation, but I mean, I'm sort of trying to do it, as a graphic novel first, and that's becoming more and more difficult because I feel like I'm becoming more successful in my career now, so I have a lot more opportunities, and I'm getting to the point where I'm going to have to start turning down some of those opportunities in order to work on my own thing, which is a challenge because like I think coming from the background that I did where I struggled for so many years, in my head I'm like, what if this is the last time somebody contacts me and asks me if I can work on their project? So I'm like, I should probably take this opportunity. So I'm a sucker for that. Like if it's an interesting project, like, and I like variety too. So like a lot of times I'll have a day job and I will, sometimes from time to time take on like a freelance assignment, a few pages storyboarding on something else. And I would do that more when I was directing because you have a little bit more time to do that than you do as a storyboard artist. But yeah, so probably the next, the real goal, and I guess it's been my goal this whole time, is to tell my own stories. So it's a struggle to do that. And I think a lot of people have that goal. So who knows? But yeah. I like great stories. So anything that's a great story, I'm interested in. So that's my goal, is to always work on the best stories that I can. And I always get excited whenever I get pitched a new project. I'm like, oh man, this sounds really cool. This could be great. How cool of a thing would it be to work on something that becomes like a special film for somebody else, because I know people that have worked on some things from when I was a kid that were impactful, and even in a small way. Like I met someone who was a timer. They have people that time the frames in animation. Some shows do. I worked with this lady who had worked on, I believe what was it? It was it The Secret of Nim? I think it was The Secret of Nim. And that was like an animated movie that I watched many times as a kid, and it was like very, indelibly marked on my brain. And it's like, wow, you worked on that. That's so crazy. What was that like? And it's just cool. Like I would love to be able to work on something that becomes special to like a generation of people someday.
And hopefully you do, because I think you're already on the path, because recently you started directing episodes of Fast and the Furious, Spy Races as well. So I think like you climbed that ladder up. So as a director, how do you pick the storylines that work? I guess like when it comes to animation.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I don't really pick the storylines. Like that's the writers figure out all that stuff, and that's not really something I have too much influence over. Like,
but
the best I can hope for is to sort of get in the ear of like my boss, and then that guy gets in the ear of the guy above him, and then they can sort of go over to the story side and be like, we're not so sure about this idea or whatever. So it's, directors in animation, particularly like episodic directors, we have, I think, a lot less power in that regard compared to like a film director. Film directors they could say like, oh, I don't like this script, get a new writer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not me. But yeah, like, so yeah, we sort of take a back seat to that, and that's fine. Yeah, I wouldn't want the responsibility of coming up with entertaining scripts. That's got to be super challenging. And I've been fortunate to work with some really talented writers, and they've done all that work for me, and all I have to worry about is telling their story in the best way with pictures.
It's in a way similar to how even when it comes to live action directing episodic television, it's pretty much like that's how the directors like work with the writers, because we had like Bobby Roth on the show previously, so he comes from directing episodes of Prison Break and TV series like that, so he said the exact same thing. So you have like very limited amount of influence when it comes to the story. And for me, it's a little bit tough to kind of frame my head around the fact that, as a director, you don't necessarily have as much influence on the story, but yeah.
Yes. I mean, it's good and it's bad, because, with great power comes great responsibility, as Uncle Ben once said. So, yeah, I mean, it's fun to have like all that influence over the show, but it's, I'm sure it's stressful as well.
Yeah. So what's next? Is there anything that you can share with what you're working on at Netflix right now, or is that all under wraps?
It's pretty under wraps. I can't really talk too much about it, but it's definitely an interesting project and very different from anything that I've worked on before.
Gotcha.
I'm trying to remember what's actually been announced. I'm not going to say anything about it, just because like I can't remember what has been announced, and I don't want to say something I'm not supposed to. So you know how it is with NDAs.
Yeah.
You got to be careful. So,
oh my God! Yeah.
But it's an adult animation project as well. And yeah, it's going to be good. I think it's going to.
I'm pretty sure we're going to hear about that in due time. So all the best with that, man.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. That's pretty much all the time we have for today. But Micah, thank you so much for
joining and opening, well, more than anything else, opening my, I guess, viewfinder to the animation side of things, because I absolutely had no idea about half the things you were talking about. So that's amazing.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I appreciate you having me. And it's always fun to talk about this stuff. So anytime, let me know.
Of course, sometime in the future, hopefully once this particular project is released.
Yeah, absolutely.
So have you on again. Awesome.
Cool, man.
All right. Cool. Till next
Thanks,
time.
Akash.
That is Junkyard Theory. Thank you so much, Micah.
Thank you.